The Liberation of Sundrian City by Andrew Lewis. Chapter 20. In Relief. The day was a rough one. A strong hot wind swept through the city, spraying dust and bossing people about. There was no escaping it. It whistled through gaps and swirled around people unabashed, as if the air itself was excited. When Linus arrived at the top tier of the grandstand, up the steep marble stairs, he saw instantly that the audience was bigger than ever today, despite the absence of High Lord Ramil. Thousands of faces peered in his direction, buzzing. He saw that some attention was being paid specifically to him, pointing fingers and gestures all around. He had wondered, but now it was apparent to him that word had spread about his victory in the previous rest day show. He expected that now, after seeing him take his seat on the Emperor's grandstand, the citizens of Sundrian City would make all kinds of profuse assumptions. People liked to embellish and exaggerate. He was the Emperor's new best friend. He was now royalty. He was replacing Deimos. Who knows what they might come up with? He smiled at the thought. He sat beside Princess Robin, and somewhere behind him lingered Deimos and a handful of guards. There were some others there, people who had pleased the Emperor in some way in the past week, and Linus noticed that the Frian's family was no longer present. Perhaps the lemon and rhubarb sweet cake had begun to lose its appeal, or the Emperor had found a new favourite treat. The proceedings began with a speech from Emperor Frigg, which went largely unnoticed due to the constant interruptions of powerful gusts of wind and the restlessness of the audience. Nothing of note was said by the Emperor, but when he sat back on his seat he gave Linus a knowing nod and looked rather smug with himself. Through the trials, 3 in total, Linus tried and failed to be attentive. He tried to enjoy the spectacle, but found he could not. He was too anxious about what was to come. He was pleased to see that the elephant employed for the day was a strong female one that he recognised. He was also pleased to see that the rider was someone who he knew from training, and whom he considered adequate for the job. The man's name escaped him, but he could remember his techniques and style, and that they were quite good. The uproarious crowd was deafening, the atmosphere electric. When the 3rd trial was complete, the Emperor motioned to Linus to come and stand beside him, and Linus complied. 3 men entered the arena at sword point, each with a bag over their head. Each was thinner than the last, spindly and weak-looking. "Are you ready, Linus?" said Frigg, a mad grin on his face. Linus didn't respond. He simply glared intently into the arena, his eyes locked on the man he could already tell was churned. The Emperor stood too, and placed an arm around Linus. The wind calmed completely, and silence seemed to emanate from the pit's centre. The first man's veil was removed, and Linus allowed his heart to skip several beats. It was churned, and he knelt before a wooden stump and placed his head down. Linus tried to act shocked, turning to the Emperor for recognition, but the Emperor didn't respond. He merely tightened his grasp on Linus's shoulder. The second veil was removed, and a man Linus didn't recognise knelt and placed his head down, shivering and jolting about in terror. Then the 3rd veil was removed, and with that came a rush of emotions that Linus could not contain. They flooded him, a deluge of reactions: shock, fear, recognition and amazement, for it was Evander who knelt down, his long, dark hair knotted and wild, the scar across his face now still healing. Now the Emperor offered his reaction. "We got him, Linus. Can you believe it?" A stamp, crunch, and churned was gone. Linus hardly noticed. He was fixated on Evander. He was right there, so calmly awaiting his death, holding all the answers that Linus needed to hear. Another death. The unrecognised man was gone in a spray of dark red. The elephant moved along to Evander, and Linus found himself running to the front of the grandstand. He needed to know. As much as he wanted Evander dead, he needed to ask him so many things. He wanted to beat him and hound him and berate him with questions, and when Evander died, Linus wanted him to have a clear view of the tears in his eyes as he took his last breath. He screamed out, "No, stop!" but his voice was lost in a sudden uproar from the crowd. For at that very moment something had happened. The rider had tilted forward slowly, subtly, and the three swordsmen had each received an arrow to the chest, dropping to their deaths on the dusty floor of the pit. The rider swayed to the side and fell, colliding heavily with the ground, and in a gap above, right in the spot where Linus used to watch from, among the children stood a small band of archers and swordsmen, rebels. Deimos took to action, ordering attack on Evander. "Arrows to the pit now!" And the palace archers moved forth to take action. In the same moment, Evander had jumped to his feet, his hands still bound, and made a bowing motion to the elephant, who stood before him without a rider. The elephant lowered its head and uncurled its trunk, and Evander made a dash directly at the beast, arrows flying past his back, narrowly missing. He ran directly at the animal's trunk and put his foot to it with ease. In one large bound he was at the top, where he rolled over the beast's forehead and landed with his legs splayed around its neck, facing the correct way to ride it. Together they made straight for the wall, to the spot where the band of rebels stood. Evander rose to his feet, took a running jump, and was caught around the shoulders by two men who leaned out in his aid. "Hold," bellowed Deimos. "Hold your fire. If any of you fire a single arrow into that crowd, I will kill you myself." The arrows stopped, and the band of men began to move out through the crowd. As Evander was turned away from the arena, he spoke a single word, inaudible but unmistakable. "Linus." And all too soon he was swept away with the band of rebels, who formed a protective barrier around him and disappeared through the crowd. Emperor Frigg stood gaping and dumbstruck. So too did Linus, and indeed the thousands of people surrounding the pit's perimeter. All but one man was stunned, rendered useless, and that one man was Commander Deimos, who leapt into action in the way only the best of leaders can. "Assemble at the palace gates, men, everyone, now!" Linus took to gathering with the small assembly at Deimos's command, attentive, wanting to help. He was determined that it would be him who found Evander. "Pat, send a crow to the wall. Have them watching inward to the fields for the fugitive. Darian, gather any guards you can. Have them at the gates immediately. Go, now." Linus stood shaking. There was a spell on Deimos the likes of which he had never experienced. He was absorbed, emanating energy, exuding power. But he was not angry. No, he was something much scarier than that. He was calm. He was at war. "Linus, to your room immediately," he ordered, taking Linus by surprise. "Sir, I am coming." "Your room, Linus. Go, or I will have you taken." He shrunk momentarily, submitting to the command, but a surge hit him, defiance, an anger the likes of which he'd never known. "Sir, I am coming with you," he bellowed. But the sentence had barely passed his lips when he found the hand of Deimos around the scruff of his neck. He was shoved hard back and caught by a large guard. "Take him to room 55, guard the door until I say." "No!" It was done. The commander turned, sweeping away, a trail of men behind him. He needn't beckon them. It was in a fit of kicks and screams that Linus was dragged to his room. "Let me go," he screamed, thrashing about wildly. The guard was patient with him, however. His forceful hand kept him in check, at times literally dragging him along. But there was no beating or unnecessary force. A hard shove in the back and Linus landed collapsed on his bed. There was no point in bashing the door or screaming. It was useless. Linus knew that. He bit hard on his blanket and pounded at the bed with his fists. He hated Commander Deimos more than ever. Evander, well, he wasn't sure what he felt there. Like a question that cannot be posed. Frustrating and elusive and tormenting. This was a moment that could only be cured by time. Patience, he reminded himself, to no avail. For the voice of reason was fickle now and unheard. There was nothing to do but thrash around in rage.